Hello and good morning. Welcome to Sky News Breakfast. Now, against a background of pay settlements and new talks by some striking unions, railway workers will walk out today for the second time this week, bringing many services across the country to a standstill. Members of the RMT at 14 of the country's train operating companies are taking strike action with no sign of their long-running dispute over pay and conditions being resolved. And there's a warning this morning that Easter holiday getaways could be under threat as there are strikes due by airport and passport staff. Well, there was some optimism in government after it announced that teachers would be in talks with the government this weekend and have called off their next round of strikes. NHS workers have also suspended further strikes and are recommending that their members accept a new pay offer. Well, junior doctors in England have agreed to formal talks with the government after a three-day strike this week. However, other strikes show no sign of coming to an end as railway workers, university lecturers and people who are members of the public sector unions continue their strike action. Some of these strikes are escalating, with staff at passport offices announcing 5 weeks of strike action from the 3rd of April. And security guards at Heathrow Airport will strike over Easter. The Public and Commercial Services Union says there's little reason to be hopeful of a breakthrough. Well, I'm pleased to say that Alice Porter is with us now live from Euston Station this morning. Alice, good to have you with us. So another day of misery on the railway networks for people trying to use the system.
That's right. We've only got about half of services that are operating in the country today here at Euston. I've just had a look and we've got about one train an hour going to Birmingham. But I think it's important to stress London, of course, is immensely well connected and there'll be parts of the country where there'll be simply no services at all on what would be normally a busy Saturday for lots of people wanting to go about their business. Now, this is very much because of a long-running dispute with the RMT union. This has actually been going on since June, but it seems that there's no way at the moment this is going to be resolved anytime soon. Network Rail, they've put forward a pay offer for this year of 5% and 4% for next financial year, but that was rejected by the RMT union last month, and that's why this industrial action just keeps on happening. This is the second day today. We've got further strike action at the end of month and April, and we've got really a sort of stalemate really between the government and the RMT union. The RMT union saying they want an unconditional offer and the government saying that is the final offer on the table. So there's a sort of stalemate there. But there has been some excellent progress this week. If we look to the NHS, for example, we had a real breakthrough in talks with Stephen Barclay and the unions representing nurses and ambulance workers. And that offer is going to be put to its members with all but one who are going to be encouraging their members to accept it. But crucially, a lot of those unions have been asking for an above-inflation pay rise, so well above 10%. And the offer from Stephen Barclay is 5%. So is that going to be enough for people to vote on it? We don't quite know. And I think there's been some momentum there. I think because there's been progress in the talks there, we've got potentially Stephen Barclay and the junior doctors who may well be meeting as early as next week. That's not been timetabled yet, but they will be having to sit down. But crucially, they've got a lot of negotiations to go through. Remember, the junior doctors are striking for a 35% pay rise. And Stephen Barclay says that's simply unaffordable. So they're going to have to find a way of meeting in the middle. But I think the government will at least be pleased that these talks means industrial action is caused off. We've seen such huge disruption to our schools over the last couple of weeks with teachers going on strike. That's been paused for the moment to allow talks to carry on. Same with junior doctors, same with nurses. So the government will be pleased whilst they're desperately trying to bring down waiting lists. We've heard this week 175,000 procedures and operations had to be postponed. So the government's under pressure when it comes to the NHS. So we'll be delighted at the very least these talks are happening. So there's progress made there. But ultimately, until strikes are called off, it's still a very uncertain time. And it feels like as soon as one strike is called off, yet another one appears. We heard in the last couple of days, passport office workers with the PCS union, they're going to be doing 5 weeks of strikes. And then we've got issues with the baggage handlers in Heathrow. So it still feels like we've got a long way to go. And it still seems like we've got many weeks and potentially months ahead where we could have disruption like we're seeing today across our rail networks.
We'll be speaking to the boss of the RMT, Mick Lynch, later on this morning. Alice, for now, at Euston, thank you. Now, the United States says that the International Criminal Court is right to have issued an arrest warrant for the Russian President Vladimir Putin and for Russia's Commissioner on Children's Rights. The court has accused them of war crimes, including the illegal deportation of children to Russia. The Kremlin says the indictment is outrageous and unacceptable. The move highlights the importance of the visits to Russia next week by the Chinese President Xi Jinping. Our international affairs editor, Dominic Waghorn, has this.
It is an extraordinary development in this war. Vladimir Putin, the leader of a UN Security Council permanent member nation, facing an international arrest warrant, and for the most serious of war crimes. Sky News was the first to reveal video evidence of Russian soldiers searching a place of sanctuary in Ukraine, looking for children. This was one orphanage in Kherson where orphans were abducted at gunpoint by the Russian military. These children, among thousands across Ukraine, said to have been taken by the Russians during this war. Allegations now the focus of International Criminal Court arrest warrants that go to the very top of the Russian government.
The International Criminal Court has issued 2 warrants of arrest in the Ukraine situation. For Vladimir Putin, President of the Russian Federation, and for Maria Lvova-Belova, Commissioner of the Russian President for Children's Rights, for the alleged war crimes of deportation of children from Ukrainian occupied territories into the Russian Federation. It is forbidden by international law for occupying powers to transfer civilians from the territory they live in to other territories.
This was Vladimir Putin meeting his Children's Rights Commissioner last month. The arrest warrants against both are being welcomed by Ukraine's President Zelensky.
Separating children from their families, depriving them of any opportunity to contact their relatives, hiding children on the territory of Russia, throwing them in remote regions, all this is an obvious state policy of Russia, state decisions and state evil, which begins precisely with the top official of this state.
The warrants mean Vladimir Putin must think very carefully about where he travels and make the Russian leader even more of an international pariah. The Kremlin and its mouthpieces have reacted with fury.
My reaction that, first of all, is the stupidity and irresponsibility of the International Criminal Court. It's the policy of the Russian government to save children, not to steal children, but to save children from the front line zone.
So what are the chances of Vladimir Putin going from wartime leader to the accused in an international court of law?
We have to be very realistic that we're not going to see Putin in The Hague anytime soon. And of course, there'll be a lot of cynicism as to whether we will ever see him there. Of course, we won't be looking at a trial in absentia at the ICC.
The move puts Putin in the dubious company of former Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi and Sudanese President Omar al-Bashir, both indicted by the ICC but never tried. Vladimir Putin may be able to elude prosecution for now, but that doesn't mean this move doesn't have real significance.
It's important because this man is now, as many would say he should have been said to be from a couple of weeks after the war started, labelled as a criminal. And that's going to make it much, much more difficult for the coalition of countries supporting Ukraine to separate out and to say, oh, we shouldn't be carrying on with this war.
Next week, China's President Xi Jinping flies to Moscow for talks with Vladimir Putin. His host will be an alleged war criminal. How might that influence his next move? The answer to that could be crucial in the next stage of this war. Dominic Waghorn, Sky News.
Now, among those who have come out in support of that ICC warrant is Joe Biden. He says it's clear that President Putin has violated international law.
Well, I think it's justified, but the question is, it's not recognized internationally by us either. But I think it makes a very strong point. He's clearly committed war crimes.
Now, according to the ICC's chief prosecutor, hundreds of Ukrainian children have been taken from orphanages and transported to Russia. But in Ukraine, it's reported that some 16,000 children have been taken. Our chief correspondent Stuart Ramsey and his team have spoken to families living in Kyiv and in Dnipro about their challenges in getting their children home. This is his report.
This is the moment Ludmila finally tracked down and was reunited with her daughter Nastya after months of separation. She had travelled thousands of miles through Russia to Crimea to rescue her daughter. She says she was effectively tricked into letting her go on a trip organised by the authorities.
Я думаю, детей они забрали для того, чтобы присоединить потом к ним родителям, чтобы потом деньгами и обещать дома, там, квартиры им, помощь финансовую. Ну, конечно, да, они хотели к себе присоединить, хотели свою, да, свой менталитет, свое, чтобы были с ними и их правила, да.
Like thousands of children, Nastya joined what was described as a summer camp. But she says it wasn't that at all.
Они говорили, что мы вас здесь кормим, поем, даем воду, как бы тепло, уют, вот такие неблагодарные. Вот. Даже шарики, которые были подобие украинскому флагу, срывали, лопали и кричали то же самое, что типа вот неблагодарные, езжайте к своим фашистам.
When Russia paraded a group of Ukrainian children on a Moscow stage with a soldier, claiming that they were saved from Ukraine, it caused outrage here. Ukraine has been telling the world that its children were effectively being kidnapped by Russia to turn them against their mother country. The ICC appears to agree. President Zelensky has been calling for action from the ICC since the start of the year. And doubtless he'll be pleased, as will his government, about these latest developments. But it's probably fair to say it'll not make much difference in the short term. That means that many Ukrainian children will remain in Russian territory. Save Ukraine is an NGO that's dedicated itself to helping families get their children back. They say Russia had a detailed strategy and plan to take the children.
They thought this through for, I don't know, maybe for not even for us, who we must look at this from the perspective of history. So it's nothing new. And this whole thing was prepared. And what do they do with children? It's like a part of bigger policy, that's all, against Ukraine.
And that's been thought about as a proper plan?
Yeah. We stand that it was not only about full-scale invasion in 2022. Yeah, it was prepared long before this.
The exact number of children who have left Ukraine and may never be seen here again isn't known. But the ICC moves may one day at least bring someone responsible to justice. Stuart Ramsey, Sky News, Ukraine.
Now, the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, is in Rwanda to highlight the government's plan to send migrants to the country. Let's bring in our political correspondent, Rob Powell, who is in Westminster for us this morning. Rob, so Suella has landed in Rwanda. What's she going to be doing while she's there?
So she's going to be meeting the President, the Foreign Minister. She's going to be visiting some of the sites, the accommodation that's linked to the controversial deportation scheme that was signed about a year ago by her predecessor, Priti Patel. The Home Secretary landed in Kigali, the Rwandan capital, in the last couple of hours. You can see her plane there. I think the point of this trip is to initially try and remind voters in the UK that the government is still serious about this plan to deport people who arrive in the UK by crossing the channel on small boats to Rwanda and force them to claim asylum there. The discussions, the Home Secretary says, will focus on how they plan to get the scheme to work operationally. So I think they want to give out the impression that they haven't abandoned the plan. Clearly, it's tied up in legal challenges at the moment, and no one so far has actually been deported to Rwanda under it. I think this is also potentially about reassuring the Rwandan government that the UK still wants to pursue this. The Home Secretary's been pushing back in remarks overnight on the suggestion that only 200 people could be accommodated in Rwanda through this scheme. She says actually that's the capacity of one of the initial reception hostels, and that actually thousands of people could potentially be taken to Rwanda under this. Of course, the scheme in general remains controversial. The Home Secretary has said again overnight that in her view, Rwanda is one of the safest countries in the world. Clearly, documents that were unearthed during the legal challenge show that even within government there has been a degree of caution about the human rights record of Rwanda and concern about whether the UK should be involved in this respect. With this country. I think in the near term, the thing that is going to have probably the greater impact on cutting numbers of people crossing the channel in small boats is actually going to be all of the money being given to the French to beef up security there, rather than controversial schemes like this. But I think the fact that it is seen as inflammatory by many is part of the point for the government, because this is about politics as well as practicalities, and sending a message out to voters that it's taking a robust and strong stance on this. I guess the worry that people have that deal with refugees and people that are fleeing war zones is that in a bid to essentially send this message out to voters, some of the most vulnerable people in the world fleeing from perilous situations may be caught up and damaged by it.
OK, Rob in Westminster for now. Thank you. All right, let's take a look at some other stories that are making news this morning. And a convicted murderer who tackled 8 terrorists during the 2019 Fishmongers Hall attack is among those to be awarded for his bravery. Stephen Gallant confronted Usman Khan as he carried out his attack during a prison education conference. 3 other men who helped bring Khan down are also to be honoured. Wyoming has become the first state in the United States to ban abortion pills. Legal fights over abortion rights continue across America after the rights to access abortion was overturned by the Supreme Court last year. And the motoring company, the RAC, says that diesel drivers are not currently benefiting from the freeze in fuel duty. Despite wholesale diesel costs falling to a 15-month low, they say that major fuel retailers have refused to cut prices at the pump in any meaningful way. Now, there were clashes in Paris between police and protesters overnight, with 61 people being arrested. It follows the decision by the French government to push through a rise in the state pension age from 62 to 64. President Macron now faces 2 motions of no confidence tabled by the opposition after he forced that legislation through without giving Parliament a vote. Well, our international correspondent Alex Rossi is in the French capital, Paris, for us and sent us this report.
It was another night of protest and rioting as demonstrators lit fires and confronted the police in the Place de la Concorde. This fury here and across France at President Macron's plan to raise the retirement age from 62 to 64.
Very angry because even if we protest, they will just do 49.3 and there is no difference.
They do the special constitutional power.
Yes, yes, and it's only here in France, so it's very angry.
You feel it's anti-democratic?
Yes, totally.
We're all very angry about this law.
About the pension change.
It's really unfair for everyone.
A lot of people manifested and protested already in the streets pacifically and didn't want to hear us, and now we're going to scream.
The nation is now braced for much more of this. Protesters once again lobbing missiles at the police. The backdrop to this standoff, the lower house of Parliament, which the government bypassed, instead using special constitutional powers to force through the legislation. It is difficult to overstate just how angry people are at President Macron's pension reforms. The big question now is whether or not the strikes, the demonstrations, and even the riots become more frequent in the days, weeks and months to come and bring paralysis to this country. France has been dealing with rolling strikes and direct actions for a couple of months since the plan was announced. And perhaps nothing symbolises this crisis more than the bags of uncollected rubbish clogging up the capital's streets. In this country, a dignified and comfortable retirement is seen as an inalienable right after years of hard work, and it cuts to the core of what it means to be French. But the government claims with an ageing population, reform is unavoidable if the system is not to buckle and break. More nightly protests are now planned, and the next few days will be a big test for the government. and a nation which is seething at the prospect of having to work longer. Alex Rossi, Sky News, Paris.
Let's get some analysis on what's happening in France right now by speaking to the political commentator Agnes Poirier, who's joining us from Paris. Good morning to you, Agnes, and thanks very much for being with us. Just first of all, just give us a sense of what it's like in Paris right now and across the country. How are people feeling?
Well, I mean, it's not as if we're not used to riots and to protests. So what we're seeing, what we saw yesterday for the second night in Paris at the Place de la Concorde, a very beautiful square where the guillotine used to stand during the French Revolution, and which is crucially opposite the National Assembly, it's just a few thousand young people and facing the police. I mean, those scenes are quite familiar to us. Now, of course, the president and the government will be watching very closely because, I don't know if you remember, in 2018, the Yellow Vest movement really frightened the government in its violence and its in its radical ways. And the president asked his interior minister yesterday to let him know of everything that is happening in the country, because there is a possibility that trade unions who have called for another day of action next Thursday and of general strike might also be, if you'd like, outflanked by very violent protest on the fringe. And this is certainly something that the president and the government will want to avoid. But this is difficult. The situation is quite volatile because of the use of Article 49.3, which is constitutional, which is perfectly legal, which has been used many times before. But on such a heated topic, such an emotional, if you like, topic, such as the pension reform, it is a gamble. It is a political gamble. And we know President Macron doesn't shy away from taking risks, but that may be one political risk too many.
Yeah, I mean, he's quoted in one of the papers this morning as saying you have to take your risk. I mean, you've laid out for us, Agnes, that there is a sort of a timeline of where we may see these demonstrations going. But talk to us about the political timeline as well. Those motions of censure, the motions of no confidence have been tabled. When are we going to get a vote on that? And what are the chances that Macron could lose that vote? Because it's the left and the right that have tabled those motions.
Well, there have been votes of no confidence before against President Macron because it doesn't hold a majority at the Assembly. They were all rejected. It is likely that these ones on Monday will be rejected. Look, if it passed, it's quite simple. The pension reform law won't pass and will be going to the bin of history, and the French government will fall. That is to say, the president will have to appoint a new prime minister and a new government. And he could, although he's not obliged to do so, he could also choose to dissolve the National Assembly and therefore to summon new legislative elections. Again, that would be a high political gamble, but we're not there yet. It's on Monday. But even, if the no confidence vote is rejected, which is likely, then the pension reform will be made into law. But I doubt the protest will die down as a consequence. The volatility and the trade unions, which on this subject are really united, will want to make their voice heard. So, it's the backlash in the streets. In the end, in France, the power is with the people, and President Macron knows this.
Yeah, he does indeed. All right, Agnes, really appreciate your analysis, as always. Thank you for your time this morning, and have a good weekend. Thank you. Now, as some unions ask their members to accept a new pay offer, and there are new talks involving others, railway workers from the RMT are walking out today for the second time this week. Let's speak to the union's General Secretary, Mick Lynch, who joins us now live from Euston. Mick Lynch, good morning to you. Thank you for being with us this morning. So, I mean, what happened to that optimism that was around the turn of the year that this deal could be settled?
Well, I'm still optimistic, but we haven't got an offer that we can consider. The companies came up with a package recently that we put to our members in a mass consultation all around the country, and they found that the conditions attached to that very modest offer, a poor offer really, are not acceptable. So there's a debate going on between us and the companies about what they should do next. They've got to get a mandate from the government. We're expecting to meet with them early next week, possibly Tuesday, to discuss the next steps. But they've really got to put some new money on the table, and they've got to take away these conditions that our members find unacceptable. And hopefully, if we can do that through constructive conversation, we can put a package to our people for them to consider in a vote. But at the moment, it's just not there.
So it's the money and it's the conditions. Just, Mick, you know, this has been running on for, as you well know and as passengers know, for a good few months now. What are those conditions that your members cannot accept?
Well, the companies have stated to me across the table they're going to close every ticket office in Britain. They're going to introduce new contracts of employment that will lower the wages, not increase them, of new starters in our industry. They want to lower the wages of guards. They want to bring driver-only operation across the network as a principle, so that in the future there will be no second person on a train, even intercity trains that are operating out of Euston here. They want to dilute the sick pay. They want to dilute our holiday pay. They want to make Sunday working mandatory in areas where it's never been mandatory, so people get no choices. I think there are 18 items of conditionality on this offer, and the offer itself is below half the rate of inflation over the 2 years that this dispute has been in 22 and 23. And, of course, we haven't had a pay rise in this industry for 3 years. So if you stack all that up, it's a very poor offer compared to the problems that our members are facing, the cost of living crisis and all the rest of it. But what is really at the forefront of our members' thinking is the conditions of employment and the benefits we get from our employment are being diluted, as they have been for so many workers in Britain, many of whom are on a casual basis, on 0 hours and all the rest of it, where other people have gone, and we're not going to tolerate that. We need good benefits, we need proper agreements, and we don't want these conditions imposed upon us. We want an agreement on the future of the railway, and if we can get that, we can get a settlement.
Yeah, we don't have loads of time. I do want to get a few more questions to you. I mean, you get any sense that with the fact that nurses' unions and unions representing paramedics are asking their members to accept their pay offer, and teachers are in talks, hearing the junior doctors want to have talks as well, any sense that that's going to affect your negotiating position? Is there pressure telling now for you guys to try and settle an agreement?
Well, the pressure on us is from our members. Our members need a deal that they can accept. What the difference between our negotiations and everybody else's, it seems, so if you take the fire service, teachers, nurses, doctors, there are no conditions. This is new money that's being introduced, the back pay elements that they've put in last week and the future payments. There are no conditions. They're not saying to nurses, you've got to work different shifts. They're not saying to doctors, you've got to take less sick pay or lower pensions. In fact, they're boosting doctors' pensions, it seems, from the headlines I've seen. They're saying to us in the railway pension scheme that they're going to increase the contributions and lower the benefits. So we call it strings attached. It's the strings that are attached to this deal that really concern our people. We're realistic about what we can achieve on money. But nobody else seems to have these conditions imposed upon them. And equally, nobody else is working for companies in the public sector that are making vast profits. Since the pandemic, these companies have made £400 million of profit. They're going to make over £118 million this year. And they're paying their directors vast amounts of money, millions of pounds being paid in individual salaries. And one of the directors had their salary increased by 275%. Last year, so that's not acceptable. We've got to get a bit of fairness in this system.
And Mick, you mentioned you got pressure from your members. What about pressure from the public? I mean, you said this week that when strike action's not on, many of these train operating companies can't run the railways properly anyway. And then you add further pressure to that when there is strike action. What's the public meant to do?
Well, we're sorry for the inconvenience of the public, but what the public are caught in a system that is completely incompetent. The companies that are extracting these profits from the passengers and from the taxpayer don't care about whether there is a good level of service, because they are being paid on strike days. They were paid all through the pandemic. They are indemnified from any loss in this dispute by a government that's prepared to subsidise an attack on the RMT and on my members for some ideological reason. And that is so that they drive down working conditions and teach the rest of the working class a lesson. And we're not going to accept that lesson from a government of billionaires and oligarchs. So what we're going to do is stand by the conditions and the agreements that we've made, the contracts that we've made, and we hope that other workers in Britain will sympathise with that. We get vast amounts of support. As I travel about the network on non-strike days, people come up to me and shake my hands. They congratulate our members for their steadfast resolve, and they come up to us on our picket lines, which are all around the country today, and
Mick,
say, keep going until you get the result you need.
You are fighting on, and of course it's worth noting as well that the strike action the RMT had with Network Rail has been paused while you negotiate there. What was on the offer there with Network Rail? What did you manage to get through with those guys that you can't resolve with the train operating companies?
Well, they've added money to the deal. The two deals were very similar up until a few weeks ago, and Network Rail have added extra money. Our members will get extra earnings in Network Rail, and it's not available in this deal from the train operating companies. They've also said that the pay offer is not conditional on us accepting the changes that they want to bring in. We'll deal with those changes separately through the machinery and through consultation and through the safety regulator that we've got. But the Network Rail deal is not conditional on accepting these changes that they're saying in the train operating companies have to be adopted. So there is a way forward. All of the industry knows what needs to be done, the chief executives that we deal with, but it's the government, the people in Whitehall, that are stopping a deal being done. I think they're going to wait for everybody else to be settled until they deal with the RMT. That's the way they conduct themselves. It's come from Grant Shapps and Rishi Sunak, and before them Boris Johnson. They see the RMT as some kind of target. We're prepared to take that on. We think we've galvanised a lot of change and a lot of changed attitudes from trade unions and working people in this country, and that's fair enough.
But the public will suffer while you take that on.
Well, our people are suffering. Our people are suffering. They lose their wages. The government is imposing this dispute on the people and on the passengers. The government could settle it tomorrow if they wish to. They're using the passengers and our members as victims in the crossfire of their ideological dispute with trade unions and the anti-trade union laws that they want to bring in, and the suppression of freedoms and all the rest of it.
All right, Mick Lynch, General Secretary of the RMT. You're in talks with the train operating companies on Tuesday, you say, and thank you for your time this morning.
Thank you. Cheers.
All right, let's take a look at what the weather's got. So it looked like it started raining there in central London. Now, it's going to be mild and unsettled this weekend with some heavy downpours to watch out for. It's cloudy this morning, mostly, but there is a scattering of showers, as we just saw in central London, as well as some mist and fog patches. More persistent rain is going to affect the Western Isles. Now, let's take a look at some of the stories making headlines this morning. I can bring in Afia Hagen and Pete Price to have a quick look through what we've got this morning. Pete, I love how you do that. You're always changing your shirt. Lovely stuff. Right, let's crack through it. We haven't got loads of time. I want to get through these if we can. Pete, let's start with you. Front page of the Daily Express. The headline there, BBC faces revolt if licence fee rises. What's that about?
Indeed, the Silver Voice campaign has decided that enough is enough. If the licence goes up, there's going to be a revolution in this country. And apparently a lot of over 75s do not pay their licence fee. The fees are costing more than a week's basic state pension to a lot of people. And really, I do believe that they should give the licence fee to people over 75, because they've worked all their life in this country and they've had a bad time over money and pensions. By the way, there's mine, ready to post after the show today. So I'm paying my licence fee. So I'm one of the honest ones. But, you know, it is crazy and it is a minefield. And will they get rid of the BBC's licence fee and make them go commercial? We do not know. But right now, it's too expensive. Give the over 75s a free licence.
I think, as the paper says on its front page as well, it is scrapped for most over 75. So let's see how that plays out. Afia, let's look at this story you picked on the front of the Mirror. And this is a campaign that was run. Mirror say that it's their campaign, but a lot of politicians got behind it as well, of course, about trying to ban the import of trophies, or the heads and body parts of animals that people have killed.
Absolutely. The Mirror have long been spearheading this campaign to ban the import or the bringing back of trophies, as you call them, body parts that are a result of killing wild animals in game resorts, usually in southern Africa. And I'm sure we can all remember the case of Cecil the lion, who was shot by a US dentist in 2015. And that was kind of one of the catalysts of this campaign. So basically, there was a private member's bill that has gone through Parliament and is now at the House of Lords, and that prevents the import of any of these trophies. So you have people who go to places in South Africa. They say that the money that they pay to hunt these animals goes towards conservation, which is a pretty dubious claim. And then they can bring that the heads and the body parts, hang them up in their houses as, a sort of pride piece. But that has now been banned. And so there should be no more of going to South Africa to kill these beautiful animals and have their heads hung up on your walls. That has been banned, thank goodness.
Yeah, and Pete, you're shaking your head. I won't get you to comment on that, but I'll take by the shake of the head that you are fully behind the decision to make that ban legal. All right, let's go on. Yeah, I mean, it's...
Don't understand the mentality of people.
It is hard to understand sometimes. Right, let's move to the inside page, and this is one I think we can all agree on, and this is inside pages of the Eye. And Pete, you're loving this one, and I am too. At the age of 26, children finally agree that mummy knows best.
Mummy's always known best. They are the best people in the world. It's Mother's Day tomorrow. To everyone that's still got their mum, look after your mum. My mum said to me, get a proper job before you go into show business. I went into hairdressing, catering, then found I could do a job without smelling of chips, and here I am today. But mums do know best.
I'm glad your mum gave you that strong advice to have a varied career, Pete. And Afua, I mean, as Pete said, it is Mother's Day tomorrow, so a shout-out to all the mums. I'll do that again tomorrow on Mother's Day. But it is interesting to see that it takes until people are 26 to finally realise. I guess that's just maturity, right?
Yes, I think it is, certainly. I mean, my daughter's 11. I'm not sure if she's ever going to say that I know best. But I thought the best bit actually in this article was where it said that people are around, or women are around 30 when they say they start turning into their mother. And I must admit that I remember very clearly the day that I realised I was absolutely turning into my mum, even though I said I never would. But shout out, Mum, I know you're watching. So good morning.
So if I just ask you, Afia, what does turning into your mum mean? Is that a bad thing?
No, it's not a bad thing, but I remember, I say all her phrases, I do all the things she used to do, and I'm just like, oh my gosh, I just have completely turned into my mother. And my brother and my dad absolutely agreed.
Imitation.
They were like, you've been doing this for years.
Imitation's the sincerest form of flattery, Afia, so your mum will be very, very proud of you. All right, let's move on quickly then to the next story. And it's a bit more serious now, but let's take a look at this. This is one you picked out, Afia. This is page 4 of The Guardian about the dangers of vaping, and anyone that's been anywhere and seen sort of teenagers around, they're all at it.
Yeah, absolutely. And some really shocking statistics in this piece, actually. At the moment, it says that vaping is having some real growth around 11 to 15-year-olds, with 9% of them using e-cigarettes, up 6% from 2018, and 18% of 15-year-olds vaping. And if the rapid growth in vaping amongst the under 18s continues in the way that it's going, in 5 years, nearly all children under the age of 18 will be vaping, which is absolutely shocking to me. Research also shows that a lot of these kids did not smoke beforehand, so they're just taking up vaping because it's seen as trendy. But let's remember that some of these vapes do have nicotine in them, and they also have chemicals and substances in them that we don't know the effects on the lungs and other parts of body because they just haven't been around that for that long, and the research hasn't been done.
Yeah, we have to leave it there, Afia. Pete, thank you. But that is the point, isn't it? We haven't had these things around for long enough, so we don't know what the damage they may be causing.